Good morning, Singapore. Thank all of you for spending some time with us today. I realize what a commitment it is for you to take a day out of your busy schedules, and we really appreciate you being here today. I've been honored to have the privilege to meet with so many brilliant companies here in Singapore over the past week, and I feel quite humbled to be able to speak with all of you this morning. Like all of our events, today's summit is much more of a learning and development experience than it is a sales and marketing conference. We're going to hold several sessions covering a variety of topics for those of you with all levels of experience. And our goal is that you leave here today with a much better understanding of how AWS can help you achieve your business goals. In addition to these sessions, I'd really encourage you to use today as an opportunity to network with your peers. There's nearly 2,000 companies represented here today, many of whom are using technology in some very amazing ways to transform their business. This explosion in cloud adoption is one of the many reasons that I decided to dedicate this chapter of my career to AWS, and I continue to be amazed with how fast the community is growing. If you're just getting started with the cloud, there's no time like the present. When I started using AWS in 2012, when I was at Dow Jones, the community wasn't nearly this big. So the cloud has introduced a seismic shift in the way companies of all sizes consume IT, and has made way for thousands of businesses, both new businesses as well as established businesses, to innovate in ways never before possible. So I'm fortunate enough to meet with venture capitalists from time to time, and they all agree that AWS has allowed them to diversify their investments across far more companies than ever before, and has opened the door for well-established industries to be disrupted in a very meaningful way. And so while we're very excited by the growth that we've seen in the business over the last 9 years, the founders of AWS certainly did not predict that it would happen this fast. So let's take a look at some of the metrics that help illustrate this seismic shift. Amazon's Simple Storage Service, otherwise known as S3, was the first ever cloud-based object storage launched in 2006. The growth we've seen in S3 has been simply staggering. We used to talk about the trillions of objects that have come in and out of the platform, but as that number became larger and larger, it became perhaps a little bit less meaningful as an illustration of growth. So this year, we instead looked at the amount of data that was transferred in and out of the platform, and we've seen a year-over-year increase of 102%, and that excludes any of the usage that we've seen inside of Amazon. We see a similar story when we talk about the growth of Amazon's Elastic Compute Cloud, otherwise known as EC2. Again, if we exclude any internal Amazon use, we have a year-over-year growth of 93% of the number of compute hours used on an already very large base. This growth, again, is just simply staggering. And in case you were wondering if this growth has been dominated by just a few customers growing very large, I'm very happy to report to you that last year we crossed the 1 million active customer mark. Now, we define an active customer as any customer who's had account activity in their account in the last 30 days. So all of these trajectories are very encouraging for a business that's only been around for 9 years. And as you can see from these three charts, the growth has been accelerating rapidly in the last several years alone. So not only has this growth increased, but it's come from every organization that consumes IT. In the startup community, AWS has been the default choice for some time. AWS has enabled tens of thousands of startups to come out of nowhere and disrupt entire industries. These are companies that you've probably heard of, like Redmart, Property Guru, Etsy, Flipboard, SmugMug, and thousands of others. We're also seeing adoption spread quickly across well-established IT organizations so that they can remain competitive with these ambitious startups. In the media landscape, my alma mater, Dow Jones and News Corp, became cloud first and is in the process of migrating more than 50 data centers to the cloud. MediaCorp, Condé Nast, New York Times, Hearst are all following similar paths. And healthcare, Bristol Myers Squibb is using AWS to run computational intensive clinical trial simulations, while reducing the cost and the time to execute by several orders of magnitude. Merck is using AWS to operate DevOps across a growing number of their business lines. In the travel industry, Qantas is using AWS to dynamically compute flight routing and to improve their customer loyalty programs. The weather company, processing billions of weather events every single day, performing analytics on them and distributing them to their millions of customers. And financial services, Suncorp in Australia is also cloud first and moving their estate to the cloud in a very quick and big way. We've got a few stories from some Singapore-based companies, which you're going to hear from a little bit later and throughout our talk this morning. When it comes down to it, every imaginable business segment is using AWS in a very meaningful way. We've also been lucky enough to build quite a public sector business over the course of the last several years. There's more than 1,600 government agencies all around the world using AWS to quickly procure and manage their IT assets, as well as reduce deployment time and costs greatly. Many government agencies are enjoying the benefit of having a common infrastructure across departments so that they can benefit from the community effect. The AWS Marketplace is allowing them to collaborate on packaged solutions across departments and consume solutions from thousands of technology vendors, all through AWS, which greatly reduces their often cumbersome bureaucratic procurement processes. In addition, there's more than 3,600 educational institutions all around the world that are not only starting to use AWS for their IT, but are now also including it in the curriculum as students are learning how to use the platform much earlier on. So from the very beginning, AWS knew that we would not be able to get sufficient reach for the business on our own. So there are a rich and growing set of consulting partners that are available to help customers of all shapes and sizes understand and implement the cloud into their business. There's a fast and growing ecosystem of born-in-the-cloud providers like CloudReach and SecondWatch. And at this point, all of the major consulting firms are growing cloud practices to help their organizations understand what cloud means to them. So a few months ago, I had the opportunity to meet with the global sales execs at Capgemini, and all of them were very proactive, positive about the growth that they're anticipating to see in their cloud business. And I've had similar conversations with many of the big players like Wipro, Infosys, Cognizant, Accenture, and several others. There's also a very rich set of third-party tools that are available to help companies manage their IT environments. Similar to the consulting partners, many of them are born in the cloud, but there's also a growing number of traditional IT vendors like Riverbed, Splunk, and SAP, and others who are making very big bets to make their solutions available in a cloud-friendly way. So what does an accelerating growth of adoption powered by a large and diverse customer base and fueled by a large partner community translate into? It puts AWS in the top right corner. While we sometimes feel a little bit lonely up there, we are, in fact, committed to keeping it that way. Now, we weren't just satisfied knowing that we were growing very quickly. We wanted to put this in the context of the overall technology industry. And what we found here was also very encouraging. Looking at the multi-billion-dollar enterprise IT companies in the world, AWS is growing at over 40% year over year, performing well above the pack, while some of the traditional vendors are shrinking, like in IBM's case, by 12%. Now, while there are many factors that contribute to this, I feel that one of the most important reasons is that AWS has given the power back to you, the customer. I've been buying technology for a long time, and I've always felt hostage to the technology that I've embedded into my systems. Licensing fees always got more expensive. Support always got worse over time. And efforts to move away often came with punitive terms. In a model where you pay only for what you use and only when you use it, AWS has to fight hard to keep your business. There's nothing keeping you committed to our platform other than the service that you're getting from AWS. As a CIO, I found this to be one of the most refreshing elements of the new world. This is one of the main reasons I came to work here and why it's so encouraging for me to see that cloud has in fact become the new normal. The question is no longer if we should move to the cloud. It's what should we move first? What order should we move our applications in? And how quickly can we move them? The benefits that organizations of all shapes and sizes have realized from adopting cloud are so great that it's become impossible for companies to ignore the cloud and expect to remain competitive. So what does this new normal look like? What are some of the things that have led us to conclude this? This morning, we're going to spend some time talking about 7 patterns that we've observed, which illustrate how the cloud has indeed, in fact, become the new normal. The first pattern is that speed is not just for startups. I've had the opportunity in this role to talk to CIOs all over the world, and I usually hear a very similar story. Some move toward the cloud to save money, some to attain a global reach, some to achieve better security posturing. Everybody would like to move faster. At the end of the day, what AWS brings to large and established organizations is the freedom from the undifferentiated heavy lifting that is traditionally associated with enterprise IT. The competitive landscape in every industry has become so great, and there are so many up-and-comers disrupting every industry who aren't weighed down with having to manage legacy infrastructure. This makes it more important than ever before to remain laser-focused on the activities that drive your business forward, and managing infrastructure is just not one of those things. The competition has no regard for your legacy and will continue to use it to their advantage whenever they can. In the old world, procurement cycles took a long time. Capacity planning was hard, and mistakes were expensive. If you bought too much infrastructure, you wasted money and may have tried to coerce systems into the spare capacity, even if it didn't really belong. If you bought too little, even worse, your customers suffered. I can't tell you how many times in my career I've spearheaded millions of dollars of investment only to watch it sit idle for long periods of time, or watch it become extinct by new technology almost immediately, and certainly well before we were ready to invest in it again. In the new world, you don't have to worry about over or under provisioning. Since you're paying only for what you use and when you use it, your costs start incredibly low and scale only with the success of your business. At Dow Jones, we went from having our capital projects average well into the hundred thousands of dollars and take months, sometimes years, if they ever completed at all, to having projects come in bite-sized chunks of tens of thousands of dollars while being able to constantly iterate on the feedback that we were receiving from customers in real time. Also in the new world, staying current is included with the price of admission. AWS has nearly doubled the number of features that it's brought to market each of the last 4 years, and you can certainly expect that this pace of innovation is going to continue. These are the kind of benefits that make IT a revenue-generating hero rather than a slow-moving cost center. So many enterprises are realizing this and embracing the fact that they can now behave like a startup. Unilever is a great example. They moved 1,700 of their brand websites to our platform and are moving 75% faster than they ever did before. Mint.com is a personal finance site that enjoys 15 million users across their platform. They moved their entire production site over to AWS, consuming about 700 EC2 instances, 1,000 EBS volumes, and is having better performance and cost modeling than ever before. Major League Baseball uses missile radar tracking systems in their StatCast system and streams data, petabytes of data from every single game that happens in baseball through Kinesis onto several other services on our platform to do real-time what-if scenarios in the middle of games. So to give you another example of how enterprises are embracing the cloud to better their business, I'd like to invite up to the stage the CEO of Globe, Ernest Koo.
Thank you to AWS for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Ernest. I am from Globe Telecom in the Philippines. We are one of 2 mobile operators in the country and proud owner of the #1 brand in the Philippines today, with about 49 million subscribers between our wireless and wireline customers. We have about close to $2.5 billion in terms of revenue, growing at about 10 to 15% per year, and about $7.6 billion in market capitalization, 6,200 employees, and close to 1 million business partners, which include our load sellers throughout the Philippines. Being a telco, one of the dilemmas we face today is constant disruption. And we have actually taken on an approach of innovate or die in our company. Innovate or die with the customer at the foremost of our minds, right? Because if not, we will be driven into extinction by over-the-top players. And as such, we have adopted a cloud-first strategy. A cloud-first strategy that we hope will bring costs down, bring CapEx down. Very important in a world like ours where we spend close to $850 million of CapEx per year. So any move we can to divert IT spending into network spending is going to be very, very key. We have taken on Amazon as a very key partner. And one of the ways they support us, aside from providing great service, is to hold these AWS days at Globe. We started that last year, 2013, I believe, with no less than their CTO, Werner Vogels, coming and having sessions with our people. We get about 200 to 300 what we call Globe, or Globe employees who come and show up to learn from the many experts at Amazon. We also held it again last year, or this year in May, with no less than Rick Harshman in attendance, honoring our very great partnership with Amazon. Also, at this juncture, I'd also like to thank Amazon. Not only are they supporting the core Globe business, but they're also helping out our startups at Kickstart. We have an incubator called Kickstart with about 19 investee companies, and Amazon, as mentioned earlier by Stephen, has been great in providing support for the many startups that we are incubating with our fund. We at Globe use a variety of services, whether it be the elastic computing platform, just plain storage, or even with data analytics. One of the biggest examples of this would be our portal. Our portal is on the Amazon cloud. This portal does all of the online selling. It does the self-service for our 50 million subscribers. This portal gets quite the number of hits right before a major phone launch. The iPhone 6, the Galaxy S6. The traffic peaks to about 100 times what it is normally because of reservations. To supplement that, we've also created a pre-registration platform, which is where customers can pre-register for devices beforehand, before delivery and before launch. As you can imagine, this gets quite a number of hits right before and has 0 hits thereafter. So that is the kind of elastic type of capacity we need to support our business. One of the most recent examples is our Gen 3 retail store. Globe has been a pioneer and innovator in telco retail in the Philippines. And for this particular store, we created several platforms, 2 of which I'd like to highlight. One is the queuing system, which is innovative in the sense that it takes your photo, we record your name and phone number, and then we call you based on, we look for you around the store. It's a 300 square meter store with full of activities. The second would be our application platform, which is done on an iPad. Both of these reside on the cloud, and that application process is also linked to our BSS for completion and activation of the SIM. As a telco, we also have tremendous data being spit out by our switch or our BSS. A lot of that data goes in a Hadoop store on the Amazon cloud, and is again brought up and down for analysis by our different analytics teams at Globe. What have we seen as far as benefits from this? Accelerated adoption. 776 instances alone were activated in 2014, and this actually means we bought less servers and actually also built less data centers. Cost efficiency, 60% less total cost of ownership. Again, very good news to a CFO, our CFO, who's been trying to bring costs down as the market becomes more competitive. Optimization, being able to go up and down and only use the service that you need for the short period of time that you would need it. Again, optimization, very, very key. But most important, and my favorite, is the ability to invent, innovate, experiment. We never know what our customers are going to be wanting to buy. So we have to be able to create product very quickly, very inexpensively for our customers. The other, of course, is that once this product goes to market and becomes a hit, we need to be able to scale. And in a traditional on-premise type of environment, you wouldn't be able to do it because, as you know, telcos aren't the most agile companies in the world. We have an 80-day procurement cycle, right? And with Amazon, we've cut this down to about 5 days. So with that, we have been able to create a lot of product. Amazon has been key to keeping us growing, and we do it all to create wonderful service for our customers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ernest. What an awesome story of enterprise transformation, and innovate or die. I'm definitely going to use that. So thank you, Ernest. So the next pattern is one that AWS has been known for a long time. Pattern number 2 is that AWS has become the default choice for startups. There's many reasons for this. Startups don't have any legacy concerns or dependencies on outdated technologies. Because the cost of experimentation is so low, and because the cloud takes away much of the undifferentiated effort that's required to build a new business, companies are able to move much faster than ever before and focus exclusively on the activities to build their business. This is a much better investment than one in building data centers, managing email servers, capacity planning, and other, frankly, non-differentiating activities. I mentioned before that I get the opportunity to talk to venture capitalists from time to time, and they're thrilled that AWS has brought the average investment needed to fund a startup down so low. This allows them to spread their investments across more companies than ever before, which means that as customers, we now have a lot more choice, but as businesses, we also have much more competition. So these are companies like Airbnb, who after only a few years in business, now boast over 400,000 users a night booking stays on their platform. Think about this for a second. 400,000 users a night. Any large hotel chain would kill for these numbers. And the best part about it is, Airbnb did all of this with just a handful of developers. Dropbox is another one. Dropbox has greatly disrupted the digital storage landscape and allows consumers and companies alike to share a seemingly infinite amount of content with one another. Tinder has developed a mobile application that's greatly disrupted matchmaking, and out of nowhere is now competing with some very well-established players in this business. So to give another example, I'd like to welcome to the stage the CTO of Redmart, Rajesh Lingappa.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rajesh. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Redmart. I'm here to talk about a startup journey. So what is Redmart? We are an online grocery service in Singapore, and we started in 2011, and we have been growing about 12% month over month. We have raised about $35 million since inception. We have about 400 plus employees, of which 40 plus are engineers, based in Singapore and Bangalore. If you're wondering what is this grocery company doing in AWS Summit, we internally call ourselves a tech company. It basically goes to show the best-in-class e-commerce apps that we have here in Singapore, and these are some of the quotes that we keep getting from our customers. Besides having best technology platform, what we also are known for is best-in-class service. I mean, unparalleled service, sorry. So the journey itself, you know what is a typical startup journey? You start with MVP, grow, scale, and go beyond. So our MVP was a simple Magento box, running on one simple server, and pretty much everything, storefront, database, and product photos. We had 4,000 products at that time. Imagine 4,000 products into 3. It's probably about 12,000 images, everything sitting in just one box. I was not full-time working there at that time, but when I actually got in full-time, it actually freaked me out. What happens if this box goes down? So the first thing we did was to get to something like this, which is still Magento, but it is fault tolerant. Obviously, we had a cluster, and thanks to RDS, we had our data safe, and S3, which basically kept my photos safe as well, and scalable, obviously. And yeah, we wrote a bunch of other applications around it. And we spent about 6 to 8 months beyond that, basically building our own bespoke e-commerce platform. This is basically how we ended up at July 2013. It is e-commerce platform which we built ourselves, and we also launched along with a warehouse management system, which is from a third party called Manhattan Associates. This is a company which sells warehouse management system, and they've been doing this for about 4 decades. And we brought them on to the cloud for the first time. It went out so well that we, in the sense between Redmart, AWS, and Manhattan Associates, we gave a joint press release. And one other thing which I would like to say is that the speed improved quite a bit, and obviously the Google ranking went up. And we continue to grow. So it was a small team, like about 6, and we were able to just launch this. And we ended up having about 100+ servers. So imagine having 100+ servers in a startup, and how would you manage it? So we basically introduced Chef. I'm sure some of you must know already what it is. It's a configuration management tool. Thanks to AWS APIs, it makes it pretty easy to actually manage huge infrastructures using a tool like Chef. And we started using Redshift. I'm just calling out some of the key ones here. And this is our scaling stage. Basically, this is how our infrastructure looked like as of end 2014. This is just a production VPC. We have about 150 servers. Imagine just one developer who is also doing something else, managing this big infrastructure. It's a classic VPC architecture, nothing different from what you might have already used. You have a public subnet, private subnet, and also we carved out a separate private subnet for our enterprise applications. By the way, we also brought one of our vendors, one of the ERP vendors, to cloud for the first time. And this is our stack. If something interests you, we are hiring. So it's basically the classic, front end, back end, Scala, Node.js stuff. And the middle one is basically the deployment pipeline. And here are some of the AWS services, just a few to call out. It's only the beginning. In 2015, there are 2 key things we are focusing on. One is DevOps, improving our DevOps. Finally, we managed to hire a couple of DevOps engineers, dedicated, yes. And so I'm very excited about EC2 container services. And that's a GA, as some of you might already know. And the bigger thing which we are looking forward to is data science. We are hiring a data science team. And we are focusing heavily on machine learning, and Kinesis is one of the services which we would be getting into. And the biggest reasons why we got into AWS is that we wanted to go regional. Of course, we started in Singapore. We wanted to eventually go regional. So we are actually going to a market out of Singapore. So we are in good hands, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajesh. Another great story. One developer managing 150 servers in an entire architecture. Could you imagine that happening 10 years ago? Amazon is well known for striving to be the Earth's most customer-centric company. Our early services were well suited for infrastructure and security, and over the last several years, as AWS has helped companies become much more efficient in these areas, we've also learned that many companies still feel that they spend too much time on the undifferentiated heavy lifting associated with other parts of their IT. In order to move as fast as your competitors, you want to find every possible way to devote your resources to your core business. Why would you want to spend your precious resources on building and maintaining IT that you can lease for just a fraction of the cost. The cloud has become just more than just infrastructure. One of the reasons that we went with AWS at Dow Jones was because of the breadth of the platform. I didn't just want to get out of my data centers. I also wanted to not worry about managing email servers. I didn't want to have to build and maintain messaging and queuing services. I didn't want to continue to operate and fine-tune databases. All of these activities are important, but at the end of the day, these weren't the activities that drove revenue into the business. By listening to customers, AWS has been able to drive product development and deliver more features than any other platform has to offer. We have 11 regions and 29 availability zones and 53 edge locations all throughout the world. On top of that, we have the most robust set of compute, storage, database, and networking offerings that allow you to spin up very simple applications very quickly, but also allow you the fine-grained controls needed to migrate and develop very sophisticated applications that require a great deal of customization, and then, of course, everything in between. As we continue to innovate on the information security space to provide you with the most trusted and secure cloud platform, we are continuing to add features and certifications that make it easier for you to meet your security and compliance requirements. We have everything from basic identity management to sophisticated monitoring of all of your API calls. Who made them, what they tried to change, and when. We offer a number of platform services that make it easier to deploy, operate, and manage your applications, while also gaining insight into the vast amounts of data that they generate. This includes several flavors of a Hadoop solution, a data warehouse, real-time streaming data, a queuing service, application workflow management, video transcoding, email, DevOps management tools, and a number of mobile services that make it easy for you to think about the things that make your app different instead of all the undifferentiated heavy lifting behind the scenes. In the corporate application space, WorkDocs allows you to share files seamlessly across your organization. Workmail is a secure and Exchange-compatible email server in the cloud that allows you to control where in the world your content will reside. Workspaces will allow you to manage desktops for your workforce in the cloud. Imagine a world where you can run desktop support entirely remotely, and with a click of a button and just a few dollars a month, you can get anybody in your staff a more powerful desktop. On top of that, the AWS Marketplace has solutions, thousands of solutions, that cut across every part of IT. We've taken the same concept that's helped Amazon.com exponentially grow its product inventory and have allowed IT vendors to sell their AWS-compatible solutions in the marketplace. This gives you a broad selection of solutions that you can deploy in seconds into your infrastructure. Nowhere else can you find an inventory of solutions this large, all of which can be procured the same way that you consume AWS today, which I would venture to guess would reduce your procurement time. And for all of these services, we have a large team of customer support and solution architects that will work with you to help you architect and operate your applications. So what I hope that this picture illustrates is that AWS can help make your entire IT organization more effective. It means that you can start taking advantage of what AWS has to offer anywhere in your business, and it should be driven by the needs of your business at the time. It won't take long before you realize the benefits in these areas, and will be able to parlay that into other experiences across other parts of your business. This breadth and depth is one of the main factors that contributed to Lydia Long, one of the world's most recognized IT analysts, to say, IT organizations cannot treat cloud infrastructure as a service providers like commodities. Another way to put this is that not all cloud providers are the same. They cannot be viewed as interchangeable. This is because the AWS service offering is so broad and deep that it extends into more areas of IT than any other platform. So I hope over the last few minutes we've been able to make clear these 3 points, which illustrate why so many customers are attracted to AWS. 1, we have more functionality by a wide margin than any other platform. 2, we have the largest community of partners and customers whose experience you can draw from. Everyone benefits from this vast and growing ecosystem. Not only do we have over 1 million customers in the largest partner ecosystem, but the improvements that we make on behalf of this community benefit everybody. And thirdly, we have the most experience developing cloud solutions. So while it's interesting to see that others have entered the market since then, it's been a bit of a surprise that they've given us such a head start. We've been doing this now for 9 years, and we are a lot better now than we were when we started. I saw this evolve quite a bit when I was a customer, and now that I'm part of the team, I've been astonished to see just how mature the processes and the platforms inside of AWS have become. Andy Jassy says this all the time: there's just no compression algorithm for experience. There simply isn't. You simply can't learn some of the lessons that we've had to learn in our business until you reach certain points of scale, and simply no other provider has reached these points yet. So to give you a taste of how companies are using the whole package to build their business, I'd like to invite Brendan O'Neill from Seco to the stage to share his experiences with us.
Good morning. So I'd like to share with you today how Seco contained IT by moving it to the cloud. Seco, we're one of the largest container leasing companies in the world. Over 90% of the world's trade moves by container. And if any of you have ever enjoyed a chili crab out at East Coast Park, you've probably wondered how much of that is actually out there. We've got a highly diversified fleet of over 1 million containers, 180 staff in 14 offices around the world, serving customers in 80 countries. This is just a brief snapshot of Seco from an IT perspective. We went live with SAP in 2007. It wasn't the smoothest of transitions. We weren't invited to share our customer success story at any SAP summit, but we did go live, and over the next year or two, improve the infrastructure, and by the end of 2013, we had 110 servers, and these were hosted in 2 co-location data center facilities in the UK, and we were heavily reliant on an outsourced provider to manage that platform. So the 3 challenges that we wanted to address were the performance of that environment. It was an aging infrastructure, now over 6 to 7 years old, and as a result, it was becoming more expensive to run, to maintain, and the outsource costs as well. And also the agility was not very good. We had a traditional infrastructure that meant that procuring and bringing in new servers took time. So we looked at a number of options. We looked at either just refreshing the servers as they were, a more virtualized platform based on converged infrastructure, or also infrastructure as a service, or a hybrid version of all 3. Obviously, I'm here today, so we chose AWS. Cost and agility, I think, are pretty much a given and have been explained very well today. We also wanted to in-source our IT. We didn't want to be reliant on a third party no longer to do it. So that's why we thought we would go with AWS, because of the managed capabilities that they have. We chose our partner for this, a company called Lemongrass. They're very experienced not just in AWS, but also in running SAP on AWS. And we wanted a mentor, not just somebody to do the transition on our behalf. We wanted to absorb their knowledge, and they were very much aligned with that strategy as well. So we started with a proof of concept in early 2014. This was, even during the proof of concept, we brought some learnings from running on AWS. We were able to do a large number of billing runs, running multiple iterations of our billing run, and taking those learnings and bringing them into our production system and seeing some gains there. Then, over the next couple of months, we brought development and QA into AWS. We redesigned our disaster recovery solution, and it was around that time that we decided, well, things are performing pretty well on AWS. We were seeing some very good gains. The environment was there. So we actually brought the production go live back by 5 months, and went live on AWS in January this year. Immediately, we saw some pretty impressive performance results, even not just the user interaction, but our batch jobs were running up to 90% quicker, data loads took half the time, and our billing cycle, which had been a bit of a pain point previously, was down by 70%. We also, as I mentioned, redesigned our disaster recovery solution, bringing the RPO and the RTO down from up to 3 days to 2 hours, and we're hoping to improve that even further. Of course, costs were a factor, and despite a spike in 2014, we're now going to see some really impressive savings over the next 2 years. So now that we're entirely on the cloud, on AWS, we've got a very agile solution. We're about to increase or double our fleet size this year or into next year, and we don't have any concerns with doing that on AWS. We've got an internal capability now. We don't have any more data centers. We sold our last piece of infrastructure a few weeks ago, and with the proceeds from that, we could probably just about afford to buy lunch. Our IT team are now much closer to the business, and they can focus a lot more on innovating with them rather than just for IT. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. Get rid of your data centers and get a free lunch. I love it. So the fourth pattern that we're seeing in the new normal is that the traditional old guard ways of doing business, where the vendors seem in charge and hold their customers hostage, seems to be changing. It seems that most of the large deals that I've been involved with over the last 20 years started with attractive pricing, but got more and more expensive over time, and I was constantly having to weigh the costs of migrating away from a proprietary technology that I found myself, unfortunately, locked into. I can vividly remember the first week when I was the CIO at Dow Jones, several vendors that we had used for a long time tried to introduce themselves to me with the threat of a licensing audit. Now, perhaps this was because they sensed that I had a different view of the world than my predecessors, but it was certainly not a great way to start our relationship. I'm sure that at least a few people in this room can relate to the feeling of being held hostage by those who would attempt to call themselves your partner. This kind of business model was very common in the world of databases. Oftentimes, there's a large premium on the licensing fees for databases, and once you start to use some of the proprietary features in the platform, it becomes very difficult to ever migrate away, and the vendors take advantage of this by trying to squeeze more money out of you over time. On top of this, my experience has shown me that when I needed the support that I paid for each year, I never got the help that I needed in the time that I needed it, and I always felt like we were making compromises in the application to make up for shortcomings in the database layer. So these are some of the reasons why so many companies have been looking to leverage open source database technologies. They've decided that it's worth the effort to try and manage and operate these open source technologies so that they don't have to deal with the consequences of punitive business tactics. The trade-off is that getting comparable performance to a proprietary database is hard. It's definitely not impossible, but the effort that is required to achieve the performance you need may outweigh some of the benefits of moving towards open source in the first place. This is why last year we were so excited to announce the launch of Amazon Aurora. Aurora is a MySQL-compatible database with 5 times better performance than what you would likely achieve with MySQL on your own. It's fully managed, so you don't have to think about availability, durability, or fault tolerance, and has all the scalability and security features that you've become accustomed to with the rest of the AWS platform. And Aurora is just one of the many examples where AWS is constantly looking at ways to reinvent both the old way of doing things as well as our existing services. Which leads us to the 5th pattern of the new normal, which is again another one of the reasons I was so excited to be at AWS. It's no longer enough for technology vendors to come up with 1 or 2 pieces of technology and ride the revenue that that brings in for decades. First of all, the competition is too hungry, but more importantly, The cloud has enabled this model of continuous reinvention. In the on-premises world, it takes a long time to roll out new enhancements, and the effort to change always has to be stacked up against the other projects that you need to engage in. The cloud offers a substantial improvement to this model. AWS, as we saw before, is constantly rolling out new features and enhancements to the platform, which you can take advantage of with absolutely no opportunity cost. For example, in 2006, when AWS launched EC2, we did so with one instance type, the M1 small. This was certainly a great achievement at the time, and we saw some very promising adoption right out of the gate. But the invention didn't stop there. Over the last 9 years, AWS has learned about the unique needs of different customers and has launched 7 different instance types, all of which have now graduated beyond their first version. At Dow Jones, we were constantly reevaluating what types of instances would best suit our needs each month and moving our applications around to optimize for both cost and performance. These are just things that you can't do in your data centers, where you're running off 3 to 5 year depreciation schedules. So amidst this constant reinvention of compute, we've seen another trend arise over the last few years. We've learned that some developers want to have even smaller amounts of compute that they can dedicate to services that they developed that have all of the necessary elements and dependencies packaged together as one unit. Some developers have achieved additional agility through managing a set of loosely coupled containers because they can be more confident when changing individual components when the blast radius is well known and predictable. It's also easier to roll them out and back, which further builds confidence. Containers have also given companies the opportunity to optimize costs even further, as they're able to run multiple containers on individual instances. This recent trend is why in November, AWS launched the preview for the Amazon EC2 container service in partnership with Docker. During the preview over the last few months, we've had the opportunity to learn from thousands of customers for how they're using it across a variety of different use cases. And we've learned through that experience to build in a number of new features that make managing containers on EC2 even easier. This includes the ability to launch containers across a cluster of EC2 instances, attach persistent EBS volumes on container launch, and the ability for you to use your own private Docker repositories, which is very important for companies who have been managing Docker for some time. Last month, we were very pleased to announce that the EC2 container service is now available for all customers. And at the same time, again, we launched several new features, proving yet again that reinvention is continuous. This included a new management console, the expansion of the service into new regions, and finally, the container service is also integrated into CloudTrail so that you can gain additional transparency into your containers and how they're running. And one of the most exciting features we added was a new scheduler to help you manage a fleet of containers. This scheduler allows you to quickly scale your containers up and down based on parameters you define, distribute traffic among them using an elastic load balancer, just like you would EC2 instances, automatically heal containers that get into a bad state, and it lets you deploy updates to your containers without ever taking the application down. We think that this scheduling service makes the EC2 container service the best place in the world to run your containers in production, and we're super excited to see what you'll build with it. So there's clearly a demand for developers to run lots of independent and loosely coupled services, and containers provide a great way to do this at scale. We started to think about this a little bit more and began to ask ourselves, what could we do to make the level of compute even smaller, require even less management overhead, and further lower costs based on the uniqueness of each application or workload? What we came up with was AWS Lambda, which frankly, I believe to be the most revolutionary service that AWS has developed since the birth of cloud computing in 2006. AWS Lambda frees you of the burden of having to manage anything but your own code. You write code that responds to events from AWS and other services, and AWS will spin up all of the necessary resources required to run your code, running tens of thousands of them in parallel if required. And the best part is you will only pay for the code that executes in 100-millisecond increments. I believe the possibilities for this are endless, and we've just only begun to scratch the surface. We're seeing customers kick off jobs or intelligence tasks when data changes in their environment. It's an ideal service for handling requests from your IoT devices. Stream and workflow processing is another great example. At Dow Jones, we were looking to overhaul our subscription management workflow platform, which was a whole bunch of EC2 instances and services running on them, all managed through the simple workflow service. And it was quite a lot of operations behind that complicated workflow to manage failure conditions and everything else. With AWS Lambda, that architecture is simplified to just a handful of JavaScript files that handle each of their own responsibilities cleanly, and we're only paying for things in 100-millisecond increments. We're also seeing customers who are writing their entire backend on Lambda, which means that they have entire applications that have a front end that's rendered on some users' devices and no servers to manage on the back end. So moving from EC2 to services like Beanstalk, then to the container service, and now to Lambda, is the kind of reinvention that's become part of our DNA, and we're very excited to see what you'll do with this. So to give us another example of how companies are using the cloud to reinvent themselves, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Marcelo Wesseler, the CEO of SingPost e-commerce.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm very excited to be here this morning and share with you a little more about the transformation that Singapore Post is currently going through. As you guys can imagine, the mail business isn't really a very exciting space to be in. Domestic mail volume has now gone backwards for several years in a row, and that adds a humongous pressure on any kind of business. And maybe that pressure was actually what kind of led us to some early successes that we've recently seen. So here's a quick overview of what we've been able to accomplish so far. And Forrester Research just featured us in a global analysis about vendors that can enable e-commerce platforms globally. Sorry. And what we do is we provide an end-to-end e-commerce service. So we enable brands and retailers that want to come to Asia Pacific to set up their website, to set up their warehouses, to take care of their delivery, but to also take care of driving traffic to their e-commerce sites and take care of customer service. So we now have 24 warehouses across the region, all the way from Sydney in the south to Korea and Japan in the north, and pretty much everywhere in the middle. We serve mostly very large customers, so if you go to the Adidas site anywhere in Southeast Asia, you'll see that that's run by us, and several other very big sites in the region. We also started, literally just released a product called Easy Commerce, which now targets small and medium-sized businesses, so that we can help smaller merchants to actually sell products online, for example, on Amazon in the US, but also a lot of the other marketplaces here in the region. I would like to thank the IDA, EDB, and Spring for their generous support for this humongous project that we've been working on for almost a year. To give you a little bit more detail of what exactly we do, so we run, I mentioned Adidas site earlier, but also if you go to Levi's in Australia, so if you go to levis.com.au, you'll see that we run that site. If you go to levis.co.kr in Korea, you'll see that we run that site. And that's a huge geographical span. With AWS, we've been actually able to use exactly the same infrastructure that we use here in Singapore and Southeast Asia, and roll that out to Australia, to Korea, and we even run a site in Europe now. And we don't have a single person based in Europe, we don't have a single person based in Australia, at least not from my team, and nor do we have somebody in Korea, so we've been able to do all of that from here. We also have some sites here in Singapore. If you go to Muji, which is my favorite site, but also Triumph, which is very exciting, and our engineers really love that site. So, I would guess there's a lot of very talented e-commerce engineers here in the room. So if you guys are looking for an exciting opportunity, come connect us on LinkedIn. and we'd be happy to talk to you. And obviously, we'll take any questions later on. We also have the photo shoots for Triumph as an additional benefit. So, but before we actually went into e-commerce, it took us a while to figure out exactly what we wanted to do. So we looked at the number of online users across Asia Pacific, and we've seen that that actually increased significantly from 2009 to 2014. So it went from 645 million to more than 1 billion in 2014. So a huge increase. So unlike the mail business, this was actually something that was growing. So definitely something that we wanted to look into. We've also seen that the market is very, very fragmented. So on the right side here, you see the standouts or the mature markets like Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea. But then you see a lot of the up-and-comers, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, so the Southeast Asian parts. So what we needed is a solution that actually works across all the various countries in the region, because it doesn't make financial sense to just launch an e-commerce site for Singapore. If you do that, it's not going to be a very good business case. So we needed to be able to do that across the region. We looked at a couple of more trends, and we've seen that actually the marketing cost for e-commerce businesses has gone up significantly in the last several years. So if you measure that by a cost per click on Google, that has quadrupled over the last 5 years. So the cost to drive traffic to an e-commerce site has gone up significantly, so it's gotten harder for businesses to acquire customers. The good news is that technology has just done the reverse, so thank you AWS for actually significantly lowering down our cost. If we would have done this business about 10 years ago, we would have spent a lot of money on servers. So I ran a site for HP in the US. We spent about $10 million in servers when we started the site. So if we would have done the same thing at SingPost, I think our business case would have been dead from day one, and we wouldn't have been able to launch. Another essential thing is that e-commerce isn't necessarily a very linear, steady business. So there's a lot of spikes and valleys. So I put a little chart of a traffic pattern. So each one of these humps here is 1 week. And then you have a couple of events here in November. That's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, where traffic shoots up through the roof. And if you try to do that with on-premise servers, good luck with that, because you got a provision, for this top line here the entire year. So very, very challenging to do that. And I remember when I was at HP, I always had sleepless nights around this period of time, or Super Bowl, when our marketing team all of a sudden decided to run ads, which then eventually crashed our servers. So it wasn't a very pleasant experience. So with AWS, we can actually handle these spikes very easily. There's another chart here on the bottom, which is a little more dramatic. This is same thing. These here little things are actually weeks and humps, and then you have this huge spike here. And this is sites in Korea. Sites in Korea are significantly more advanced than in Southeast Asia. And you see, we use a chat tool called KakaoTalk to drive traffic to the e-commerce sites. And that causes huge spikes. It's kind of like a WhatsApp. And imagine sending a WhatsApp to 60 million people. That causes, obviously, a very, very huge spike in any e-commerce business. So what we needed is something that really scales. We also, when we started out on the e-commerce business, we looked what are the essential functions actually to run an e-commerce business. Obviously, we mentioned e-commerce technology and the payment systems around that. Performance marketing to drive traffic to a site. Customer care, because a lot of people, they don't quite trust what they buy online, so they still want to call. Warehousing and fulfillment, very CapEx intensive. Delivery and returns, and merchandising and store management. When we started out, SingPost actually had 2 things, so warehousing and delivery. Everything else we had to actually reinvent or had to set it up ourselves. So AWS has been great actually removing the CapEx requirements, especially on the IT side or the e-commerce front end. If you look at the architecture, that's I'm not really a technical expert, so this slide always scares me a little bit. But what I do know is that our transaction volume has increased by almost 10x over the last year, literally just within 1 year. And we've started the Adidas side about 2.5 years back, and it hasn't had a single minute of downtime. So this is something that we're very, very proud of. The reason why we love AWS, because you've seen one of the more successful business models that we've tried. We've tried 4 or 5 other ones that actually have failed. Obviously, I didn't present those today, but it really allowed us to test and learn without necessarily spending a lot of money and then making that failure very, very painful. So it allowed us to move on fairly quickly. I mentioned that it allowed us to go regional very, very quickly. Scalability, security, also a very, very important aspect. The guys at AWS are significantly more experienced at security than our team is. And last but not least, affordability and flexibility. Thanks a lot. Any questions later on, come grab me. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. Another great story about an iconic company using the cloud to continue to reinvent its business. So the sixth pattern is one that is very near and dear to my heart. As the former CIO of a company with 125 years of legacy, I can empathize with those of you who might be a little bit anxious how the cloud fits in with your existing IT investments. We understand that you need to make sense of this. So to avoid any confusion, I'm happy to tell you that moving to the cloud is not an all-or-nothing proposition. We realize that there will be a meaningful overlap in the amount of time while you're adopting cloud technologies and still utilizing your on-premises resources. The industry has coined the term hybrid to refer to this type of model, and I'll be the first to reassure you that AWS has the largest and most complete set of features that will help you implement hybrid IT. This started with our virtual private cloud offering that launched in 2009 and has grown substantially since then. To get dedicated bandwidth and predictable performance from within your data center to AWS, you can set up direct connects. Using the directory service and identity federation, you can continue to manage your corporate directories in the way that you're used to and administer what your staff can do in the cloud and when. There are a number of tools that allow you to manage your resources in a way that you're used to. This includes plugins for vCenter and System Center, as well as AWS Config and CloudTrail, which give you greater transparency into your environment than you've likely ever had before. Our CISO, Stephen Schmidt, often likes to say that an audit in AWS is an API call away. We have a rich set of deployment tools that can be used both across the cloud and your on-premises environments, making it easy to set up applications that span both. We also have a storage gateway that allows you to manage your data in the same way you do today without having to continue to invest in expensive disk upgrades and expansions. Now, there are some traditional vendors out there whose business model depends on you continuing to buy and manage their on-premises offerings. They might have you believe that hybrid is the end state and that you'll forever live in a world where you need to manage both. To me, this is very much a matter of perspective and how far out into the future you want to look. It is reasonable to assume that companies will run hybrid for several years, depending on the size of their legacy estate. That said, it is impossible for me to imagine a future where companies will continue to manage their own data center and infrastructure. The benefits of the cloud are simply far too great. Those who don't think that they will today will eventually face enough competitive pressure that they'll have to rethink their strategy or risk being left behind. So to highlight how quickly some of this is happening and how much we're seeing a demand for this, I'd like to call out the final pattern that we've observed as part of the new normal. We've found that many companies ultimately reach a tipping point. They've begun to embrace cloud in several parts of their business and become, in fact, more efficient at operating in the cloud than in their on-premises environments. As cloud becomes the new normal for these companies, they end up adopting a cloud-first standard. And a cloud-first standard reverses the burden of proof for all of their initiatives from why cloud to why not cloud. In 2009, Netflix very famously became one of our first customers to reach this point, and by all accounts, then it was considered a very bold move. But we're seeing this happen more and more every single day. This list includes some very well-established companies who have a lot of legacy to deal with and existing business models that they've rethought and improved as a part of their strategy. These are companies like Kempinski Hotels, MDON, Intuit, MicroStrategy, Splunk. And to really drive this point home, one of my favorite quotes of all time from Charles Phillips, the CEO of Infor, who said, "Friends don't let friends build data centers." So I'd like to close before I hand it over to my colleague Glenn Gore, who runs architecture for AWS for all of APAC, with just a few thoughts on managing change. This is particularly true for organizations who have built up a lot of muscle memory around doing things in a traditional way. Changing habits and embracing technology that looks different from what you're used to can be hard. When we kicked off our journey at Dow Jones in 2012, there was a lot of work to do, not only to get my 1,500 staff up to speed and on board with the changes we were trying to make, but we also had to manage changes through procurement, legal, finance, and several other executives of the different operating units. The results were astounding. We went from 70% of our resources focused on IT operations to 70% of our resources focused on product development in under 3 years while reducing my budget every year. It was definitely work, but it was worth doing. And now the community has grown so much larger since then, and the amount of help that you have at your disposal grows by the day. So I'd urge all of you to consider what this means for your business and realize that this shift is happening. And as hard as change may be, it's not in anyone's best interest to fight gravity. Thank you for your time.
Excellent. Well, welcome Singapore to AWS Summit. My name's Glenn, and what I wanted to do in this part of the keynote was dive deep a little bit into some of our more recent announcements. And to do that, it's really interesting in this time of the industry that it's never been easier and less expensive to collect, store, analyze, and share data. And what's driving this is just a proliferation of devices and connectivity. To give you an idea of a typical morning, and a lot of you will share this same journey. When I wake up in the morning, my watch has already been tracking what my heart rate was during the night, my sleep pattern, and updating that to a health dashboard. I log on and have a look at what the news articles for the day are. So media organizations are already tracking what it is that I'm interested in today. The smart meter for the home has already worked out I'm starting to use power early in the morning and turn different services on, and that feeds back into the grid to make sure that the grid has enough power to loan. All these things are driving data. And when you drive data, some interesting things happen. The volume of data is increasing massively, not only in terms of the breadth of the devices that you can collect from, but also the depth that's coming through it as well. You want almost instantaneous stream of data, because the more instantaneous, the more real-time it is, the quicker you can get insights and the quicker you can make changes to your business or to your customers. And when you think about this world of analytics, it's easy to think about it in 5 separate stages. Stage 1 is, how do I collect all of this data? It's coming from multiple devices, and some of these devices can be counted in the millions around the world. And within Amazon, we made announcements last year around Kinesis, for example, which is our real-time streaming service. You just heard Stephen talk about Lambda, which can fit into collection as well as a really easy way of taking event data, feeding it through Kinesis, and then processing it in a lightweight manner with Lambda without requiring a single server at all. And then stream that data into something like S3, which moves us into the storage part. So if I'm able to collect this data really easily, the next thing I need to do is be able to store it. And we're talking, terabytes and terabytes of data per hour, per day. Some customers are generating petabytes per day. There's massive science projects going on around the world where they're talking about petabytes per hour coming ahead. And so the ability to store this data is really, really important. We have S3, again, 102% year-on-year growth of data volume. What's driving that is this need to store this data in a highly durable manner. And S3 has 11 nines of durability, which, to give you an idea of just how durable that is, if you were to store 10 million objects in S3 for 10,000 years, you have a 50-50 chance of potentially losing one object. This is just unheard of for any type of traditional storage system. And if I look at how AWS has been tackling storage for our customers, we've had S3 as the first service that we announced, which is the object-based store. We then had EBS, the Elastic Block Store, which allows you to attach a volume to an EC2 instance and put a file system on it. But one of the things that has been a challenge is, what happens if I want to share the same content across multiple instances? Now, for those of you running on-premise data centers, you may be using technologies such as NFS and CIFS to share content, file servers, content management systems for your websites. I'm proud to announce that AWS, we've announced Elastic File System, EFS. And EFS is our third major storage product out there that complements S3 as our object store, EBS as a file system per instance. EFS, think of it as a file system across the instances. It's fully managed, so again, you don't need to worry about provisioning services or instances. It grows to petabyte scale elastically. And what's really nice about that is as it scales, we're only going to charge you for the content that you put into EFS. We're not going to charge you for what you allocate. It's a big difference again. It's this pay-as-you-go mentality that AWS has. It has very high throughput and low latency. It scales performance-wise as you scale the volume of content held within it. It's highly available and durable. So again, those of you who've run file systems before will know it gets very, very complex to run an NFS service, not only within one data center, but trying to replicate that, starting to do active-active failovers, race conditions, consistency checking. It gets very, very difficult very quickly. EFS, don't worry about it. AWS is dealing with that in the back end for you, just like we do with a lot of our other services. Which in AWS, well, that means we're replicating this across the availability zones, just like we do with S3, simple queue service, etc., which allows us to have very, very high levels of availability and durability. It's very easy to use, EFS. You can create the file system in seconds at a click of a button, just like you do with EBS. It's seamless integration. It does support NFS v4, for those of you that really like a bit of detail. And there's no upfront or minimum cost, so you can allocate an EFS volume and allocate that to be a terabyte in size, but we're not going to charge you until you start putting content into it. And that's really important because the file system should grow and shrink automatically. This idea of having static file systems is a thing of the past. You want to be able to provision storage from a capacity perspective, but also from a performance perspective, depending on your changing needs for data. And I'll go back to what I was talking about with these volumes of data that are coming in from big data. It's really important that what you are actively using of that data can change. It's obvious that the latest data that's coming in, processing that last hours of logs, that's going to be hit pretty hard. But what happens if you find a new insight within your business and you want to go back and retrospectively apply that to the last month, the last year, the last decade? Having a file system that doesn't care how far back you're going and will give you the performance you need just in time as you require it is a very powerful concept. You don't have to worry about managing storage. You don't have to worry about shifting storage from slow to fast, managing cost characteristics at all. Again, these are some of the benefits that you get from cloud that you just don't get using traditional mechanisms. It's also highly scalable. In this world, petabytes is becoming the new standard that we talk about. I still remember my first hard drive being 40 megabytes in size. I thought that was huge. We're now seeing petabyte scale work systems every day of the week. IOPS, IOs per second scales. But more importantly, when you're talking about a shared file system, how many clients do you want to be accessing this? And EFS will scale to thousands of parallel clients being able to access that file store. And that's really important for those of you that are running large workloads. For example, websites where you want to have the same content presented. Internal file systems for applications. And what's really interesting with EFS is this is a key part, as Stephen was talking about, the hybrid cloud. Because one of the big architectural elements that's been existing in existing data centers has been this concept of shared file systems or network-attached storage. And EFS provides the same types of mechanism, but now in the cloud natively, which makes it even easier for customers as they build these hybrid models and walk along the journey towards moving to the cloud. You can now have shared file storage in the cloud. So I'm happy to announce EFS will be open for preview in summer 2015. That's summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And you can register for the preview today at awsamazon.com/EFS. So it's a really big announcement. It's one that we're really excited for and will make it even easier for customers to shift data into the cloud and have legacy or traditional applications using shared file systems on AWS. So we've been able to collect all of this content. We've been able to store it. And we've been able to organize it, again, using things like Lambda to process it on the fly or traditional EC2 instances. biggest step of this pipeline is actually the analysis. There's no point collecting and storing it if we're not going to do anything with it. And this is a really interesting part because as this volume increases and the more data you get, it actually becomes more difficult to actually understand what is happening in these data streams. Us humans, we're pretty smart in some ways. We're very good lateral thinkers. We can put two very different points together and find a pattern between them. That's what we're good at. What we're not so good at is dealing with large numbers of events. Actually, humans are good at around 5 to 7 different things at any point in time. Going beyond that starts getting very difficult. And when you think about some of these workloads where you're talking about billions of events per hour or millions of events per second, it's just too vast for us to comprehend. And what this is driving is this move towards machine learning and artificial intelligence. The machines are learning. And this is being driven by how do we get this scale? How do we consume data at scale? And there's some really good examples here. You know, Netflix, for example, a well-known video streaming service. When you watch a TV show or a movie, based on your pattern of viewing, they'll recommend with a pretty high degree of accuracy what else you might like. Prismatic for social news, in gaming. You're seeing machine learning being used by just about every single industry out there. Because why? It drives sticky customer behavior. If I can give you an accurate prediction of what you're going to like, you're more likely to stay using my service compared to if I just throw random rubbish at you. And if you think about a really obvious way that this was happening, when you watched broadcast television, the advertisements being shown during shows is not targeted to me as an individual. It's targeted to an entire segment. And so what would happen, I'd get bored, I'd go change channels, or I'd go walk away for 5 minutes and then come back and keep watching. But in the new world where you can get very specific data as to what my viewing habits are, and you start linking this across different data sets, what do I like to look at? What are my hobbies? What's my social network doing? You can see how you can drive very, very targeted ads. In the case of change.org, where they can do email targeting. In the health industry, massive opportunities around machine learning of what they can do in driving better medicine, better outcomes for people as they look at the history of medical records across doctors, hospitals, etc. So it's a very, very fascinating area. But at Amazon, we've had a legacy of machine learning. Amazon's quite well known for the recommendation engine around the bookstore that we had right from the get-go. Customers who bought this also bought this product. We use machine learning internally for natural language processing. So we deal a lot with text. So being able to try and understand what is the intent or the context of what the words are saying is actually a very difficult computer science problem. And so we use machine learning to try and understand that. Is this text about romance? Is it about happiness? Is it about anger? Is it a factual element? Trying to find those elements is a wonderful area of research. Search, trying to search product catalogs of millions of data elements is quite complex. And in our fulfillment centers where we ship the packages to our customers, we have some pretty advanced vision systems that look at each package as it goes out. Has it got the right product in it? Does it weigh right? It's got lots of barcodes all over it. How do we scan these at very, very fast pace with great degree of accuracy and be able to identify if there's something that has gone wrong in the delivery process and we're shipping out not the right product to the right customer. So we have machine learning at all levels through Amazon. And we thought, well, how do we provide all internal teams with access to machine learning? So we started thinking that we had these different elements of it, and could we combine this and turn it into a service internally? And so we challenged ourselves, and we're announcing Amazon Machine Learning, AML, which is a fully managed machine learning service for developers. And what this drives is more of a data-driven development model. And if you look at the types of use cases that you think about when you think about reporting, analytics, and dashboards, you can break it up into 3 broad segments. Segment 1 is analysis and reporting. You can use our existing products and services such as Redshift, S3, Elastic MapReduce, mobile analytics to get a view of what is happening in the business. And that's kind of that traditional view. You know, 10 years ago, everyone was doing analysis and reporting. And then we've started moving towards more real-time and dashboards. What's happening right now? Why are customers calling into a call center? Why is traffic changing on the site? Particularly in the world of e-commerce, being able to see why our product is being bought in real time and being able to adjust the marketing around that in real time is a really powerful mechanism. And so we have Kinesis, EC2 and Lambda, which Stephen talked about earlier. And then the third area is the evolution of this is, why do I have to wait for the data to tell me something? What happens if I can predict the future? What happens if I can look at these patterns and have an algorithm that says, I'm going to be able to predict how this individual customer or this behavior or this pattern is going to behave? And this is where machine learning comes into its own. You have predictive models, and what it is looking for is to automatically find patterns in existing data and make confident predictions on new data. And you're going to start hearing a slightly different type of language when we talk about machine language. Machine learning is all about statistical models. There's a lot of maths behind it, and it's all about trying to get the highest confidence ratio in the prediction that the machine model is saying for you. So let me give you some examples of how you can use machine learning and how customers are using it today. So based on what you know about a customer, will they use your product? Yes or no? And you've heard of companies today, Globe, saying they're using big data, Hadoop and Mahout and other mechanisms to analyze how their mobile customers are using the different products and plans. Very powerful. Based on an order, is it fraudulent or not? There's a lot of data that you collect about an order. Time of day, country of origin. Is the credit card they're using coming from the same country they're from? Is the IP address being used across multiple accounts at the same time? There's a lot of metadata around every transaction that you can collect and look for a pattern of behavior and saying, if I see a certain pattern of behavior, I can predict that this is a fraudulent activity. And if it's a really high confidence score, 99 point something %, I'm not going to let that person proceed through the checkout process. And that reduces a lot of costs and burdens and risk for the e-commerce provider. But what happens if the confidence ratio is somewhere between 80 and 90%? Maybe what I'll do is I'll flag that with a human and they can just manually verify that. So the customer looks like they've had a checkout process, but actually the order has been held into a special queue until a human can verify what has occurred. And if it's less than 80% chance of being fraudulent, we'll just let it go through and use our existing fraud systems to, fraud management practices to handle what's happening. So you can see machine learning can just really quickly and easily cut off the highest risk aspects of it. Or what about a news article? What other articles are you interested in? So for example, I'm not a big sports fan. I never go to the sports section of the news sites. So therefore, taking up valuable real estate on the main page of a news site with sports articles is taking away other stories that I might find interesting, which is removing the opportunity for me to click through and drive revenue for that media organization. Actually, if they do a really bad job of it and just keep telling me reality TV shows, sport, I'm probably not going to go back to that website again. I'll find a better website that knows who I am. And so machine learning, very, very powerful as it drives some of these insights to you. And you've got to remember, this is happening in real time. I worked with a media organization that their metric was when you land on the front page of the website, on average it took 3 seconds from the first view of the news site to clicking on the first article. 3 seconds. So they had 3 seconds to identify who I am, where I am, what am I interested in, so they could tailor the custom specifically to that user within 3 seconds. And you can see that when they did this, they saw the user activity, they saw time spent on the website and clicking on other articles dramatically increase. This is all driven by insights, driven through machine learning in an automatic way. But there's some challenges for developers if you've been trying to do machine learning in the past. It's extremely complex to do the statistical modeling, the model building, cross-validation, algorithms, and the transformation of this data. This is not simple things to do, and you need a lot of experience in how this data works. You then need to run that in production. And those of you who've ever tried to play with data, what you can get in a lab versus what you can get in production is vastly different. It's chaos out there in production. That's what makes production so fun. But in machine learning, you don't want chaos to a certain degree. You want predictable statistical models. And then doing this at scale. Machine learning is computationally very, very heavy, particularly as you start throwing millions of events at it and petabyte scale workloads. So at AWS, we're introducing Amazon Machine Learning, which allows you to easily create machine learning models. Actually, we use the same models that we use within Amazon.com. So these are battle-hardened algorithms. They've been tested over many, many, many years at massive scale within Amazon, and we're making them available to you. You can visualize and optimize these models. So one of the great things, if you feed in data to it, what actually happens is we take 70% of the data and we use that to train the model. And then we take the other 30% and use it to test the model. And you can see these results visually. And you can even tune the model a little bit. And as you tune the model, you can see the confidence ratios change. You can see graphs showing you where the sweet spots are going to be for that model, which gives you a very easy way to interpret what the machine learning model is trying to tell you. You can put these models into production in seconds. It's also easy to use, high performance. And you can throw as much data as you want at it. It's API driven. We can deal with batch process predictions. So if you want to take yesterday's data and put it through the model and see what was happening, we support that. If you want to do real-time APIs, what's happening right now as activity goes through the application, we can do that as well through the same system. And again, there's no service to provision or manage. And this is a theme that you're going to just keep hearing more and more on the innovation front in the cloud world, is removing the servers out of the picture, moving towards more services-based systems. It also works well with storage. You can take data from S3, Redshift. There's actually a lot of public libraries out there of public data that you can use to train machine learning and interpret it yourself. Weather data, for example, a lot of universities, OpenGov, other examples. So there's a wealth of data out there if you want to start playing with this. But I wanted to put this into a real perspective for you, what the difference having machine learning as a service can make. So we ran an experiment where we want to group customers by behavior within Amazon. And so we had 2 developers working for 45 days to create a machine learning model that was 92% accurate. What we mean by that, it was 92% accurate in grouping the right customers together in the right categories. We then used AML and ran the experiment again. And we had 1 developer in 20 minutes get to 92% accuracy. This is the power of machine learning. This drives home the vast difference between the old way of looking at these, and you have to build everything yourself. You have to run the risk of learning, which is a very expensive operation, versus using battle-hardened technologies that have been proven in the field and focusing instead on what the insights are trying to tell you. 20 minutes, 1 developer versus 45 days for 2 developers. So with that, I want to end, again, talking about fighting gravity, which Stephen talked about. But I want to say it in a slightly different way. And if you look at cloud, it's still day 1 of cloud adoption. And if you go back to the 1950s when computers were first designed and invented, there was a famous quote by a certain 3-letter company that said they think there's a worldwide market for maybe 5 computers in the world. There's a lot more than that just in this room running these the PowerPoint slides right now. Worldwide market for 5. So when you start at the very front, it can be very daunting and unexpected to see how big this can get. In cloud, you saw the numbers from Stephen where he's talking about 100%, 102% growth in storage, 93% growth in EC2, 1 million plus customers. This is becoming the new normal. You're seeing graduates coming out of university who are getting trained and educated and certified in AWS skills. They want to work for companies that are using the latest technologies that are the easiest for them to use. They want to work for companies that are doing interesting things. And what this is driving is that everyone wants to use cloud. I'd say that if you look at the partners out there, and we've got 23 great partners out there today, we've got ISVs around the world who are generating the next generation of software that are all cloud native. Over the next couple of years, it is likely that all of you will be using cloud at some point, whether you want to or not, as the industry just shifts towards that. The industry is very good at shifting towards things that are better and make it more easy. And this is what cloud is doing. Cloud makes it easier, cheaper, better, less risky, more agile just by doing it. And that is what is happening in the industry. It is inevitable that you are going to be using cloud as you go forward. It's just like fighting gravity. It's a losing battle as you go through it. So today I really encourage you to spend a lot of time talking to each other, talk to the great partners. There's some great sessions from AWS staff, also from some of the partners who are presenting today. I want to thank you for your time and listening to us during the keynote.